Murder attempt survivors, what happened? 9 years ago, Buddy got jumped at a house party. I jumped in to pull the guy off of him. Attacker ended up pulling out a knife and shanking me in the stomach before fleeing to a getaway vehicle. Police were called, got the guy. We were supposed to come into court to point at him and be like he did it, but the day before he pleaded guilty. No idea what happened to the guy after that or what his punishment was, but he probably didn't learn anything from the situation. Me? I feel completely fine. Sometimes I forget that I even got stabbed. I feel a little uneasy whenever someone has a knife in their hand and it's not dinner time, but that's about it as far as trauma goes. A pregnant drunk lady called an ambulance. I was walking with a junior colleague, but a female one. The patient said she thought she was in labor and was sat on the floor, legs open, knees bent, with a blanket over her lower part. There was a small table next to her, a glass-top wooden coffee table thing. My colleague asked to examine her, and for some reason she got angry and insisted I examine her, not my female colleague. After a bit of back and forth, I knelt down and went to lift the blanket to have a look when there was a sudden crash. My colleague had put her foot through the glass table and was standing on the patient's hand, which had a huge knife in it. Turns out she wanted to stab a paramedic, and when we turned up, she chose me. My colleague saw it just in time and saved my life. The patient had already had several children who were in care and had fetal alcohol syndrome. I was asked for a statement when the next one was born, and they were also taken into care. She got away with a premeditated attempted murder and grounds of mental health. I was working as a support worker for people with mental and physical disabilities. My client had schizophrenia and BPD due to childhood and substance abuse. She stabbed me 3 times in the chest, once in the heart, penetrating my right ventricle and severing a major artery. After I advised her against the medication, nicotine gum, I almost died. Doctors said that it was a miracle I survived, with a 3% survival rate due to the severity of my injuries. That only happened back in August this year. I'm still in recovery and I'm dealing with a PTSD. She's completely ruined my life, and now I'm struggling with my identity and what I want to do in life. I was 17 at the time. I was wicked sick one weekend and my mother decided I needed to go to the hospital. She had been drinking all day as she was a terrible alcoholic. It turned out that I had strep throat. So there, typing out my discharge paperwork, and my mother approached the desk where the nurse was sitting. Clearly stinking of alcohol, the nurse told my mother that she wouldn't be allowed to drive me home because she was clearly intoxicated. This sent my mother into a drunken rage, swearing and threatening the nurse, who told her if she left the police would be called. My mother grabbed me and hurries me into the car. I start yelling at her about how irresponsible she is and how she is ruining her life with alcohol. This pisses her off even more. We only live less than a mile away, but my mother has taken a different route than normal. When I ask why, she just says it's the long way and she doesn't want to get caught. As we were traveling down this dark main back road, she begins speeding like crazy. We were doing at least 90 miles per hour when she looks over at me with a blank face and says I'm sorry. She then pulled the e-brake and cut the wheel, sending us flying off the road. The next thing I remember is sitting in the front seat of a pickup truck with an EMT shining a flashlight in my eyes along who the president was. I responded that Bill Clinton was the president. Apparently she had crashed us into a huge rock at the end of someone's property directly on my side of the car. Apparently I crawled over her and staggered to the door of the property to ask for help. They put us in different ambulance and we headed back to the hospital we just left. Upon arrival, the nurse my mother fought with said, "I knew you'd be back." My mother, in a drunken, semi-conscious state, kept saying, "I'm sorry I tried to kill you. I love you," over and over. She suffered several broken ribs, a broken collarbone, broken nose, and cracked vertebrae. I had a concussion and some cuts on my face from the door window basically exploding on impact with a rock. She was sentenced to some alcohol program through the courts and some community service. She suffered severe depression, and 6 months after this, she took her own life in another car accident. She actually asked me if I wanted to go for a ride with her that night, and I told her no. "I'll see you when you get home." That was the last thing I ever said to her. My mom was incredibly abusive. On one occasion, I was around 12 and she came into my room while I was sleeping and stabbed me in the chest with a kitchen knife, puncturing my lung. I didn't know this at the time. Obviously this woke me up and I just rolled out of the bed and ran around the house screaming. Someone on our road noticed the noise and called the police. Just before the police arrived, she started choking me and I lost consciousness. I later woke up in the hospital and mostly recovered. She's now in jail. This is the only time that she tried, but it was the most dramatic and came the closest to actually killing me. I was in Thailand heading back to my apartment from a popular corner of bars in Chiang Mai. I went down the same streets and alleys I was did, cutting through the center of the city to the edge of the mall by Ram Hospital. I passed by the technical college and saw a group of guys hanging on the corner. I didn't think anything of it as I entered the final alley that would put me at the mall in my apartment. Two mopeds passed me and went into an alcove to my right, and as I passed it they zoomed out and cut me off. Four guys hopped off their bikes and one approached and said, "Where are you going?" and decked me in the face. As I think, did this motherfucker really punch me in the face? I look up and he has his arm up and holding something in a swinging motion. And I did the only thing I could, put my arms up to protect my face and yell out. After several blows to my arm, I attempted to turn around, but his buddies were there to stop me and kept cutting off my escape. After a couple minutes, could have been less. It's all a bit of a mess of memory. They all hopped on their bikes and dipped. I have no clue why. Maybe it was my yelling and I looked down at my arm. My left arm below the wrist was cut halfway through, one of my bones completely exposed, marrow and everything, my head hanging uselessly at the end, and I immediately knew I was in deep shit even though I didn't feel a thing. I have minor medical training, so I took note that no arteries were severed, but I was bleeding profusely and needed help. I went to the guest house nearby and asked the attendant for help. Poor thing looked faint when she saw me, lol. She got me in her car and took me to Ram Hospital, literally 100 yards away. Turns out what the guy swung at me was a machete, according to the doctor. I thought it was a cane or rod of some sort, so that's my story. It's important for me to say I stayed in Thailand for a year after this event, despite friends pleased me to get the fuck out and come home. I wasn't about to let that shit ruin a lifetime opportunity for me. Anyway, I have full function of the arm and hand now. And after 4 years of drinking to bury the memory, I'm happy to say I started therapy 6 months ago. I quit drinking entirely, was diagnosed with PTSD, and I'm finally addressing the demon who's been hiding in the depths of my mind. And the motherfucker has his day numbered. When I was 11, my stepbrother, who was 16, started sexually abusing me and my little sister. Didn't know this until much later. She was 8. We had just moved in with him and his family, and it was 5 stays from my mom. We didn't know anyone, and my dad took him volunteering, spending time with me as him being a nice older brother. After a year, I started to realize that this was seriously wrong and started to fight back. One night I just got fed up and sick of the shit, so I told him no and that I was gonna tell my dad what was going on. He started to strangle me, and I believe he would have killed me if my dad didn't come stumbling home from the bar. The next day I told my mom what happened and she told my dad. After talking to my sister, he sent me and her on the next flight home to live with my grandparents. He said he tried talking to his wife about it, but she called us liars. He stayed married to her another few years before getting a divorce. I've seen my dad maybe 15 times since it's happened. I've never really told anyone about this but my partner, because the one person I expected to be there for me really wasn't. I feel like he betrayed me and my sister. He may be able to drink himself to forgetting, but I can't because I have a scar on my neck as a constant reminder. Not me, but my wife. She had a childhood friend who was her older brother that lived next door growing up. She said he was very quiet and shy but always looked out for her if things got rough or she got bullied when they would play with all the neighborhood kids. The way she describes it, one day he just snapped. He was in 8th grade, she was in 6th. He snuck off to the bathroom to skip class with a couple friends where he stabbed them to death with scissors and was on his way to her classroom when he got stopped by a teacher. He had a list on his backpack with her name on it and a couple other kids from the friend group. He was charged as an adult and put in prison mental health facility. He wrote her several times while incarcerated apologizing. He got out a few years ago and committed suicide no long after. My wife still struggles with strangers, and to this day playgrounds and things like that make her extremely uncomfortable. We are now starting our family. It weighs heavy on her that our kids might have friends where that could happen without warning. It's not easy. I don't personally remember this, and I only found out the story after I told my mom I have fear of looking out windows at night. Apparently when I was 3 or 4 I was in the kitchen with my mom one night when a man came through the kitchen window and tried to stab her. My father ran in and with a gun and shot at the man. He climbed back out the window and the police never found him. Another time when I was 13, we lived in an apartment complex my father owned. At night, the laundry room needed to be locked up and the change emptied. The change was close to around $100 a night. I would normally lock up the laundry building around 10 p.m. It was a really rough neighborhood, so my father had a large dog, Rottweiler and Malamute mix, and he was trained to walk with me everywhere. I was a very small girl, and I'm sure that dog was a big deterrent for a lot of people. Anyway, one night I go out to close down the laundry building and my dog won't come inside with me. He's barking up at the sky and won't follow any command I give. I cleaned out the building and gathered the coins. And the whole time my dog is standing by the door looking up at the sky. I lock up the door and turn to leave and a man jumps down off the roof. He has a huge knife in his hand. He yells something over my dog losing his mind, barking and growling. He had a crazy shit-eating grin on his face. He then tried to run at me and my dog jumped up on him. I ran back to our apartment and my dog stayed back to fight him. I told my dad what happened and we ran back to get my dog and fight the man. My dog was stabbed 3 times and needed to be hospitalized for days at the vet. He pulled through and lived many more years. They never found the guy. He pointed gun at my face, pulled the trigger and it didn't fire. I could have beaten Usain Bolt in the next 10 seconds. My father had several mental disorders which I later learned. He tried to murder me when I was 9 years old after years of physical, mental and emotional abuse. His mental disorders that I'm not aware of included anger issues, bipolar disorder, PTSD and paranoia. He would tell me all the time that he hated me because I looked like and reminded him of my mother who divorced him after he hit her. His abuse continued for years because he told me if I told her about it, he'd kill me and her. And my mind was unaware because he only ever hit her once, so I don't think she realized he'd abused his own child. One day he was especially bad. I remember I had multiple fractured ribs, a fractured collarbone, and several bruises and cuts. By this point I was already into horror movies, thankfully, and all I could think of because of that was get a knife, because the damsel in distress always goes for a knife. I managed to get some distance between us by running inside. I went straight to the kitchen and grabbed the knife off the counter. Then got down on my knees and elbows to use my body to hide it. It was a big butcher knife. I heard him stop behind me, and when I saw him lean forward, I turned and lashed out at him, leaving a sizable gash across his face. It didn't kill him, but he died when I was 13 due to a heart attack. That was the last time I saw him. Other than when I saw him in court for my mom to get full custody. She asked me during the hearing about the gash and all I said, I cut him. But I think she put the pieces together because she never pressured about why.